Hello and good evening. We are already under full moon energies in the sign of Leo, 5th of February. And I thought that would be interesting to remind about this full moon because it's a good time to make your ritual, to release energies of the past that you are still carrying, old versions of the self, memories and patterns that you don't need to carry, they're too heavy already. And to create a new path or to open a window, a new perspective in your life and in your mind, in your body, in your spirit. And for today, I come with 3 aspects or 3 points of discussion. And one is the state of the self, psychedelic, and then the third is trauma healing. And I will somehow show how they connect with each other and what actually means this connection and what kind of points of connection we can find between them. Because I am familiar with these notions, but some of them are not clear, or some aspects of them might not be clear to all, and I own my own vision or interpretation of each of them. So the states of the self, well, this is quite a new notion for me, but I believe that for many, especially those who are more familiar with, let's say, spirituality and terminology around the self, the lower self, the higher self, energy and frequency, low vibration, high vibrations, and so on. It's easier to navigate through these notions and define them or find maybe an explanation of why we have to speak about the state of the self, because it's one self, so maybe there should be one reality, one definition. And this topic came to me yesterday when I was going through a book from a training in a school I'm not going to mention, but it's a school of psychotherapy. And there was a very clear distinction there between the lower self, the higher self, and the core or the essence of a person. And of course, these are part of a nomenclature they use in the school to teach certain things and to make classifications and to create a profile or a diagnosis or things like that. So I'm not going to touch into their own perspectives. I don't even have a full overview of it. I'm not studying that school, but I will try to bring my own perspective because I come from a trauma-informed perspective, but also from a shamanistic practitioner perspective and from a scientific perspective too. I'm able to blend all these perspectives in one. And then, of course, I based everything on my own personal experience about all those things that I mentioned before. And so I create my own vision and interpretation. And you might relate with this vision or not. Or maybe you might find these sites that are interesting for you too, or that you find that are resonating with your own way of interpreting and understanding. So in my perspective, and speaking also from a trauma perspective, if I consider the Trans-Rupert theory, but also the work with trauma we always do with constellation and energy work, and trying to see the situation of a person and its own trauma biography from a meta perspective at the level of the morphogenetic field, there is only one self. We are actually meant to be and to embody one unique self with one identity. But then along our life, and this can even start at conception, we start to identify and to transfer energies and understanding and notion to other people around us. And we identify, especially because those people are very important for us. And sometimes we actually invent energies with whom to identify that are not even real. And we create trauma survival strategies to be able to cope with a certain trauma that happened. So more we go through life, more fragmented due to all this overlapping of experiences, identification, and transferences processes, and so on, more fragmented we become. The initial self that started with the conception, with a cell, that then multiply and became organs and a body and a mind and a full person, the initial self starts to fragment. And most of these processes of fragmentation, we are not aware of them because they really happen in that period up to 3 years of age from conception, that we don't have any memory because they will be kept into the subconscious until we start to connect with them and retrieve them, and then the healing eventually will bring the puzzle back. But when I hear people saying, oh, I need to connect with my higher self, or my higher self is guiding me to do this and that, or to take a certain practice or path and improve myself and clear myself, or connect to all these galactic beings and guides and protection from outer world, when I hear this, I almost want to cry and laugh at the same time. Because there is no higher self. You are a human body, and your mind, your psyche is very creative. In survival mechanisms where we disconnect from the body and from the origin that caused the fragmentation or the split in trauma processes, we desperately search for substitutes or for realities that could give us what we cannot provide for ourselves. So the higher self becomes something that is outside us, a little bit bigger than us, and ironically, knows much more than we know actually about us. It's like that higher self oversees and supervises us from above or somewhere else. And then some people speak about the lower self, which would be like those kind of low vibration, low frequency energies that we have stored and trapped in our body, those negative emotions that make us denser, right? And then prevent us from understanding our true path and our soul, and to fulfill us on many levels. But this lower self, if these are all negative emotions, they cannot be avoided. So I don't see why they should be seen as something to be discarded and something to be feared, when actually they are our allies to understand our trauma mechanisms and to understand where and how the fragmentation happened. And so between the lower and this higher self, some people will think that our core or our essence is in between. Yes, our identity, health identity, is in between trauma survival mechanisms and traumatized parts. And the healthy self, those small fragments that are still healthy, untouched by all these mechanisms, are always trying to find a way to bring them back, all these parts. But should we think that we need to navigate from the lower to the higher realm to withdraw them? Like those trips or journeys in shamanistic practice, they speak about the underworld, the subconscious, the middle world, that is the daily life, and the upper world, that is a spiritual high-level realm. Is this what we actually need to create artificially a higher and a less dense energy and a very dense low energy, and to believe that we can navigate from up to down and from down to up in an attempt to retrieve our part and become fulfilled and complete? I personally don't need all this. Actually, since I started to practice and to do on myself trauma therapy and constellation work, I understood that what I need is just myself, my authentic self, and that is something that I have to uncover by doing all this work, the inner work, therapeutically supported work, healing work, getting to know myself and understand all those mechanisms, retrieving those memories that are lost in this conscious. So for me, it's enough to know that I am a body. I have a psyche, which is very complex, with a lot of subconscious and more conscious realities. And I have my own mechanism of trauma that are trapped in the body and expressed to it. And independently of what my soul wanted or not wanted when I was born, and what the mission of the soul might be, in this present moment, if I have to inquire about what do I need to do now, or where I am now, who I am now, I can only say I'm on my path of self-discovery, and I'm finding step by step my true authentic self. And I express myself from this self. I know it's a little repetition of this self, but I don't look to the lower self or the higher self and what is in the middle, because I'm already a whole and I don't need higher or lower vibrations. Everything is welcome. I don't differentiate. I don't separate these energies. I know that I can get into the lower, or whatever I want to call them, when I choose the survive mode, when I want to self-pity me, when I want to create conflict inside myself and with the others, when I want to blame myself and the others, when I want to feel shame. But then when I am in a thrive mode, I am somehow in a higher energy, right? A higher vibration. And when I have to navigate in between these two opposites, I navigate with some clarity that is this the work I want to do? And I don't do it because of a sense of guilt or emergency or obsession, but I do it because I know it's the right thing to do for myself, and it's something that pays off. Retrieving my real self, the only one, and becoming present with the self. Because many of us tend to escape from this, and it's much more comfortable to divide and to create the separation between lower and higher self or state or whatsoever energies, than to stay present and together, all together, to keep them all together. And then we go and find substitutes that will give us that ultimate sensation of completeness and of belonging to something that makes sense, that is not merely us, but something bigger, something wider, something else. And that artificially can comfort us with the idea of healing. And I was there for several years. I practiced quite intensively with certain regularity healing practices, and I went also to retreats and ceremonies where the psychedelics were used. Of course, I don't speak about drugs. I speak about plant medicine that can induce psychedelic states, like ayahuasca, peyote, mushrooms, and so on. I also practiced for a while. I participated into ceremonies with sweat lodge, where you can have trance experiences, or you somehow get into this visualizations of different energies that are not there, because it induces you into a similar state of psychedelic state. So I had my trips, and consequently I got fragmented. And it was not something that I did because someone told me, but because I really wanted to find out more about myself and experience and understand what this can be and heal ultimately. And it's true. In these ceremonies with plant medicine, if you follow sacred intention and a ceremony set up, and you are guided by people who already have some experience, you get your part of healing, of course, because then you have to confront your shadows, all those layers of your psyche that were hidden, that will journey together with you and will show you what you didn't or you were not able to confront in an awake state. It's like a journey. All these psychedelic journeys are very beautiful sometimes, very intense. Sometimes they are very scary because you dissolve yourself. Your own self is getting into so many fragments that you can completely disappear and dissociate. I also have this part done, and it was somehow scary to feel that I was all over the place and nowhere, that my body disappeared. I almost panicked in such a ceremony. And although they tried to comfort me, saying that I was healing intergenerationally at a cellular level, that the plant was doing a very profound work with me, every time I remember that ceremony and the experience I had, no matter how spectacular it was, I still freak out. Because now, from the perspective of the therapist and what actually mean fragmentation and defragmentation and how to be able to repair, how long it takes and how difficult sometimes is, I tell to myself that I didn't know what I was doing at that time. And I was not aware of the risks of this kind of experiences. On the other hand, I don't say that this kind of experience or ceremony are not useful, because actually I see more and more there is a tendency of people working with plant medicine to associate it with therapy after, to help and support the integration, because they understood it's one necessary step, the fully integration of these experiences. So to be able to unite the fragments, because psychologically, a psychedelic will bring you fragments out, and then you need help to bring them back, especially when you already have a tendency to dissociate and disappear. And if this mechanism is very familiar for your body and it happens in the session or ceremony, then you have to be sure you get back to the body, and that all the experience makes sense to you, and that you can embrace your reality and your real self, authentic self, without continuing to be in a loop somewhere else. So I was saying that actually now there is this trend where they create a school and courses for people who went through these ceremonies or who periodically do this, to get the support for real integration at psychotherapeutic level. And then for some cases, for some symptoms and illnesses, microdosing of some of these plants is even advised. And then, of course, there is also the other path for some, probably not for all, that is called psychedelic assisted psychotherapy, where you actually can use these drugs as medicine, probably it's also microdosed, to assist the person in its own process of healing and therapy. And I personally am perfectly fine with everything as long as we are aware what we are facing and what we are doing and the consequences of each tool or method or combination of them. And I believe one of the things that nowadays is still missing in this alternative practitioners world, when people tend to experience a lot, almost to consume all these offerings, what is missing is a real awareness and guidelines about what each experience can bring, what each modality brings in terms of consequences or risks, or how the risks could be mitigated to their best. And this relates very much with the integrity and ethical issues of the profession of therapists or healers, or whatever you want to call the people providing this psychedelic ceremonies or experience, or even the therapeutical setting. And then we have trauma healing. And I already mentioned how this relates with the state of the self and the psychedelic. Because what can happen, one of the risks that can happen when the person goes through a ceremony of psychedelics and goes out of the body, or goes into that higher state or lower vibration state and tends to stay there, because for some reason that is a protection mechanism for the person, or a numbing mechanism or whatsoever. It's always a trauma survival mechanism. What happens is that the person gets back to the reality as it would already be cut in halves or quarters. But on the other side, we'll have that idea or conviction that those things that were revealed during the journey have been healed during that journey. And in most of the cases, yes, something can be healed. The plant medicine, especially, they have a certain wisdom of their own. And if you go with a pure intention and a sacred intention in a sacred space, a lot of healing happens. But then, if you are not aware of the integration process that needs to happen also after, and you come back not completely grounded, not completely embodied, that healing that you think or wished for is not happening. Actually, you will still navigate inside your psyche between the so-called higher and lower self, trying to make sense of the whole experience and not understanding why you are still uncomfortable inside yourself, and why actually you have some difficulty to ground in the reality, and you feel either rejected, or you feel that you don't belong to it, or you feel like your space is somehow limited, or that others want to take your space and don't understand your process. And I've already heard, and many of them are actually guides and they organize retreats and workshops. I've heard people saying things like, oh, I got so much healing. I went into 60, 70, 80, 100 ayahuasca ceremonies, and I puked my soul out with every ceremony. And it felt so liberating. And I was so much healed very deeply, very deeply, very deeply. And I wonder how many fragments that have not been placed into their right place in the cell, how many parts of the real identity are still in split and governing the life of those people. This is a good question, because it's the same question that we can ask to ourselves every time we think that we want to do a healing session, but we get out with that sense that either we live in another dimension and the life still feels empty, like something is lacking, and we don't find our center, we cannot walk our path, we are still lost somewhere. Or we just feel that we are so healed and so centered and so grounded that we don't need anything else. And we walk like we would walk on clouds, and everything seems blissful and beautiful and perfect. But then at the first difficult situation, we either overreact or we don't know what to do, or we feel simply that it's too much. So we tend to withdraw and we don't face that reality and that situation because we are still not able to put a boundary, a healthy one. And we're still wandering in between lost fragments of the self. So I believe it's difficult to give recipes for what kind of modalities to work with, to really get healed and to really get grounded and to have a healthy expression of the self and to be oneself, not several, because there is so much offers nowadays. And alternative communities and all these trends of creating new paths into spiritual enlightenment and in expressing authentic self or higher self, listening to our soul purpose and all these beautiful words. In many cases, they are just words, because then you see what is behind. And you ask yourself, would it be easier to have less definitions and less words and less realities and just keep track and stay grounded with our own reality, create our own path? Well, it's not easy to create an own path when there are so many other possibilities and guides and all these inviting offerings for workshops, for instant gratification and instant healing and overhealing and overdoing with all these practices. But one thing that I've learned for myself after going to workshops and retreats and consuming also all these offerings and understanding what was the right one for me, one thing that I've learned is that no matter what is the practice that I choose for the therapy session or workshop, I have to learn to listen to my gut feeling. It's like a kind of antenna, this inner knowing, this intuition that tells me what will be right for me. And in most of the cases, at least for the last 4 or 5 years, it was a good guiding tool. Because actually I went, and it was a gradual process of development and a progress I've noticed for myself. I went to those people, therapists or healers, or sessions and activities that gave me something important. I learned new things about myself, and then I created a path on my own. Of course, it also happened only a few times, not so many, that some of these workshops or retreats had something that was not good for me. But that was a learning, a teaching also lesson, a learning. Because I always felt or had some red signs when something was not fully okay for myself. And if I would follow them, then things will go smoother. But if I didn't follow and I accepted to submit myself to those people or those practices, then something would go wrong. And luckily, it didn't happen many times. But the few times when it happened, it was really a big lesson. And then I understood that I don't have to go back to that kind of tool or that person. And I can go next to something different, something else, and explore more. So yes, for those of you that are new to this path or realm of alternative therapies and spiritual practices, I would advise that you open your inner eyes and you listen to yourself when you choose a modality or a healer or a therapist. First, experience that and see how it feels. Because if you have a little sign or just a little doubt inside yourself, it might be good to see why you have it, what it means. And don't be mesmerized with beautiful words and beautiful testimonials from other people or by those people who have thousands or hundreds of followers and disciples and students. Because sometimes this is just marketing, a consequence of the marketing and knowing how to sell a product. We are still living in a society where the money are a driving force. And when the status quo is still important and glitters a lot and attracts a lot the attention. Sometimes it's even better to take small steps and do small things for yourself and experience several things in small doses than actually going and fragmenting yourself with high doses of ayahuasca or mushrooms or whatsoever for many days or weeks in a row. You can actually achieve these trance states also by doing breath work or any other kind of ecstatic practices that will send yourself out of the body. And be sure that in a state where you are disconnected from the body, you cannot make the right choice for yourself. You are just run by your own survival mechanism. And even if it seems to you that you are thriving and you are enlightened and your energy is very high and beautiful, that can be actually just an illusion. And it's not about higher or lower self. It's about just the fact that you are so disconnected and fragmented that you forgot what actually means to live inside the body, to inhabit the body fully, and to be aware of what is reality inside of you. So be very careful. That is not a joke. It's about your life and your health. It's an advice. You will feel inside of you, if you listen to this talk, what is important. But always know that these trauma mechanisms, the way they control us, are very subtle. And unless you are very aware what happened to you, or you remember a lot of what happened, if many traumatic events happen to you in your life, you will continue to be their victim. It is very complex. More you know yourself, more you explore with yourself in a healthy way, easier will be to choose one path or another, a modality or another, or to go to a certain therapist, healer, or medicine man or woman or another. You always have an option. And the first option has to be yourself. How you relate to yourself and how you understand what is useful what is necessary and what is needed for your own progress and healthy way of living. And I leave it here. Think about an intention of release for this evening if you want to make your full moon ritual. And see you next time. Bye-bye.